I was 4 or 5 years old when my parents separated. For a while, my mother and I lived in a small, two-bedroom apartment on the first floor of an old building. I had my own room, but I rarely slept there. The separation was still new, and I hated waking up alone, so I usually climbed into her bed. The bedrooms stood opposite each other at the end of a narrow hallway. From my mother's bed, you could see through her open doorway and part of the entrance to my room. It was the middle of summer, and the apartment had no air conditioning. My mother kept the bedroom window open at night. It was directly behind the headboard, only a few feet above the ground, with a thin screen covering it. One night, I woke without knowing why. The room was dark except for weak yellow light from the parking lot. My mother was asleep beside me. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed our cat sitting in the doorway. That immediately felt wrong. He usually slept with us, curled near the foot of the bed. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring across the hallway into my bedroom. His ears were pulled back. After several seconds, he slowly walked into my room. A moment later, he made a low, strange meow. It was not the sound he made when he wanted food or attention. It sounded uncertain, almost like a warning. I watched the dark doorway but could not see anything beyond it. I turned and tried to wake my mother. She was a heavy sleeper, and it took several seconds before she moved. I remember touching her shoulder and whispering that something was in my room. She opened her eyes and lifted her head. We both looked toward the hallway. A man was standing outside my bedroom. He was already moving when we saw him, stepping out of my doorway and into the hall. The parking lot light gave us only a rough outline. He appeared tall and broad, wearing dark clothing. I could not see his face, but I remember one hand touching the wall as he moved toward my mother's room. I remember the cat backing away from the doorway after the man appeared. He flattened himself against the floor and disappeared beneath the bed without making another sound. My mother did not scream or ask who he was. She grabbed me so quickly that I barely understood what was happening. The next thing I remember was the bedroom window opening behind us. My mother tore the screen loose, lifted me from the bed, and pushed me through. It was only about a 3-foot drop, but at that age it felt much farther. I landed on the grass, confused and terrified. A second later, my mother climbed through after me. We ran from the window and began shouting for help. Lights switched on in nearby apartments. Someone called the police, while another neighbor let us wait inside. My mother held me against her chest. She was shaking so badly that I could feel it through her arms. The police arrived within minutes. Several officers entered our apartment with flashlights and weapons drawn. They searched every room, every closet, and the patio behind the building. The man was gone. There were no broken windows and no signs that anyone had forced the door open. The only unusual thing was the front door. It was unlocked. The officers believed the intruder had escaped through it after we climbed out the window. That explanation sounded reasonable, but my mother insisted she had locked the door before bed. She always checked it more than once. The door had a regular deadbolt and a metal security chain. According to my mother, both had been secured that night. Neither lock appeared damaged. The police suggested that stress may have caused her to forget. My mother refused to accept that, but there was nothing else they could prove. For the next several nights, we stayed with a relative. Eventually, we returned during the day to collect clothes and decide what to do next. My mother tried to behave normally around me, but she no longer allowed me out of her sight. About a week after the break-in, she began cleaning the kitchen. Near the refrigerator was a narrow utility closet containing the water heater. It was not a place we used often. The door was usually blocked by a trash bin and grocery bags. When my mother opened it, she noticed something behind the water heater. There was a cheap spiral notebook pushed against the wall. Beside it were dark work gloves and several gum wrappers. None of those things belonged to us. The notebook contained names, short notes, and rough drawings. Some names had lines through them. Others were circled. There were sketches of rooms, doors, and windows, though it was unclear whether they represented our apartment. My mother called the police again. The officers took the notebook and gloves, but they could not identify the intruder. They said the items might have belonged to a maintenance worker or a previous tenant, though even they did not seem convinced. The most disturbing possibility was mentioned before they left. The man may not have broken in that night. He could have entered earlier, perhaps while the front door was briefly open or maintenance workers had access to the building. He could then have hidden inside the water heater closet and waited until we were asleep. No one knew how long he had been there. The gum wrapper suggested he had spent time inside the closet. The gloves indicated that he may have planned not to leave fingerprints. The notebook was never explained. We moved out shortly afterward. For years, I remembered only separate pieces of the incident: the open window, the fall onto the grass, my mother running barefoot, and the shadow of the man in the hallway. As I got older, the full meaning became much worse. The man had not wandered into the wrong apartment. He had entered quietly, hidden himself only a few yards from where we ate and slept, and waited until the middle of the night. I also realized something about our cat. He had not simply walked into my bedroom. He had been watching the man. The intruder must have been inside my room before stepping into the hallway. He may have been standing near my bed, looking through my belongings, or waiting for me to return to a room I usually refuse to sleep in. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the cat had not noticed him. I wonder how long he would have remained hidden. Most of all, I wonder why he chose my bedroom first. She was still on. My girlfriend, Emily, was supposed to spend a week in Oregon, helping her family prepare for her grandmother's birthday. She had been planning the trip for months. By the time Friday arrived, 3 suitcases and a garment bag were lined up beside our front door. Emily was obsessive about schedules. She printed her tickets, checked the weather every morning, and made lists for things most people would never think to list. Missing a flight would have ruined her entire week. That was why I nearly panicked when I woke on Saturday and found her still asleep beside me. Her flight had left more than 2 hours earlier. I shook her awake and asked what had happened. She opened her eyes slowly, looked at the clock, and showed almost no concern. She indicated that the trip was no longer important and that everything had already been handled. That response made no sense. Her grandmother's health had been getting worse, and Emily had spoken about the visit almost every day. Yet she simply turned away from me and fell asleep again. Even stranger, she began snoring. In the 5 years we had lived together, I had never heard her snore. I assumed there had been a family argument or some last-minute emergency she did not want to discuss. Since I had to work, I left her alone. When I returned that evening, the apartment was dark. Emily was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank television. She did not react when I opened the door. Only after I spoke did she suddenly turn toward me and smile. She appeared excited to see me, but something about the expression felt delayed, as though she had remembered what she was supposed to do only after hearing my voice. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked about my day and listened carefully, but her responses came several seconds too late. Sometimes her face remained completely still before the smile returned. I asked whether something had happened with her grandmother. For a moment, all emotion left her face. Then she indicated that everything was fine and quickly changed the subject. The next few days became increasingly uncomfortable. Emily refused to leave the apartment. She had already taken the week off work, but she normally hated staying indoors. I suggested visiting the park, getting coffee, or even going grocery shopping together. Each time, she found a reason to remain home. She also stopped eating with me. At dinner, she moved food around her plate and claimed she was not hungry. But during the night, I would hear cabinets opening in the kitchen. In the mornings, I found cereal scattered across the floor, torn bread bags, empty cartons of milk, and uncooked rice spread over the counters. Once, I found a package of frozen chicken open in the sink. When I asked about the mess, Emily stared at it as though she had never seen food before. Then she began cleaning without offering any explanation. There were other changes. She covered the bathroom mirror with a towel. She left her phone uncharged. She began asking questions about herself. She wanted to know which perfume she usually wore, what she ordered at our favorite restaurant, and what she normally did when she was nervous. At first, I answered without thinking. Then she asked which small mistake would make me realize she was not really Emily. I laughed, but she did not. By Thursday, I finally noticed something obvious. Her luggage was gone. I had not seen the suitcases since the morning she was supposed to leave. Her toothbrush, shampoo, medication, and travel clothes were missing too. I searched the closets, the storage room, and even the trunk of my car. There was no sign that she had unpacked anything. It was as though the bags had left the apartment without her. I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, facing the wall, and asked where everything had gone. She remained still for almost a minute. Then she slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes looked hollow. The smile on her face was gentle, but it did not match the warning in her expression. She made it clear that I should stop asking questions. After that, she barely acknowledged me for 2 days. She slept in the bedroom while I stayed on the couch. She spent hours standing at the windows or staring into corners. Sometimes I heard her whispering, but I could never understand the words. On Friday night, she finally allowed me back into the bedroom. She lay with her back toward me and did not move. Sometime after 2 in the morning, a violent noise woke me. It came from the kitchen. Something was tearing through packages and knocking objects onto the floor. Beneath the crashes, I heard low growling and the wet sound of chewing. I stepped into the hallway. The kitchen light was on, but I could not see past the doorway. The sound stopped immediately. I waited, listening to the silence, then moved 1 step closer. Emily's voice came from the kitchen, but it sounded harsher and deeper than I had ever heard it. She ordered me to return to bed. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I stood frozen, trying to convince myself that she was sick or sleepwalking. Then something heavy struck the floor inside the kitchen. I went back to the bedroom and locked the door. The chewing began again, almost immediately. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over. When I woke, I was alone. The bathroom was empty. The bedroom was empty. Emily was nowhere in the apartment. I entered the kitchen and stopped. Blood covered the floor and lower cabinets. For one terrible second, I thought it belonged to her. Then I saw the torn packages. Raw chicken, beef, and pork had been ripped apart and scattered across the tiles. Most of it was gone. What remained was covered in deep marks that did not look as though they had been made by a knife. The refrigerator door was still open. I backed away, feeling dizzy. Then the front door unlocked. I heard suitcases rolling across the entryway. A familiar voice called from the hall, cheerful and exhausted after a long trip. I turned toward the doorway. Emily stepped inside, carrying her handbag, with all 3 suitcases behind her. She was wearing the same jacket she had worn when I dropped her at the airport. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and an airline tag was still attached to one suitcase. Everything about her looked tired, ordinary, and real. She had just returned from Oregon. Behind me, from somewhere inside the apartment, I heard the bedroom floor creak. This happened in the late 1980s or very early 1990s, when I was 6 or 7 years old. My sister was 14 or 15, and our parents trusted her to babysit me whenever they went out. Because of the age difference, we rarely fought. To me, she felt almost like a second parent. We lived in a small town in West Texas, where almost everyone knew everyone else. That made what happened feel even more impossible. It was a winter evening, sometime around 8. The temperature had dropped quickly after sunset, and the wind was moving hard across the open desert. My sister and I were alone in the common room, watching one of those old crime programs about murders, kidnappings, and police manhunts. The episode that night followed a quiet man who had attacked his neighbors and disappeared with their young daughter. I do not remember the names, but I remember the photographs of the empty house and the warning that he was still missing. Our common room had 2 entrances. The front door was solid wood and opened into a small entryway. Outside, it was a glass storm door that had to be opened before anyone could reach the main door. The back wall was almost entirely glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded a large door that opened into the backyard. Without the exterior light, the glass reflected the room and showed nothing beyond it but darkness. That night, the backyard light was off. About 45 minutes into the program, someone struck the front door 3 times. The blows were so hard that the entryway seemed to shake. My sister and I jumped and screamed. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then everything became silent. The only lights in the house came from the television and the kitchen farther down the hall. We tried to convince ourselves that the wind had thrown something against the door. There were planters and an old rocking chair on the porch, and West Texas winds could move surprisingly heavy objects. We stayed on the carpet, holding on to each other and waiting. A minute passed. Then we heard the storm door close. It made a soft, metallic swing, followed by the unmistakable click of the frame. That sound changed everything. The wind could have pushed a planter. It could not have opened the storm door, struck the wooden door, and then closed the outer door again. Someone had been standing on our porch. My sister crawled toward the television and switched it off. It was an old set with a metal dial, and turning it produced a loud mechanical thunk. The room became darker. Only the weak kitchen light remained, stretching a pale rectangle across the hallway floor. My sister stayed crouched beside the television. I remained in the middle of the room, sitting on my knees. Neither of us spoke. We kept looking at the front door, expecting the handle to move. Nothing happened. Several minutes may have passed. Eventually, I began to wonder whether whoever had knocked had left. Then I turned toward the back wall. At first, I saw only my faint reflection in the glass. Behind it was the black backyard. The handle on the back door moved. It turned slowly downward, stopped against the lock, and returned to its original position. My body went rigid. The handle moved again. This time, whoever was outside pulled gently, testing whether the door would open. The lock held. For several seconds, there was no movement. Then the person began jerking the door with both hands. The glass wall shook violently. Each pull made the windows rattle. My reflection blurred, became clear, then blurred again with every jerk. My sister screamed. I could not move. She ran across the room, grabbed me by the arm, and dragged me down the hallway. We entered her bedroom, slammed the door, and began pushing furniture against it. She pulled the mattress from the bed and wedged it against the door. A chair, a small dresser, and anything else she could move went behind it. The banging at the back door had stopped. That frightened me more than the noise. My sister had remembered to bring the cordless phone, one of those heavy beige plastic models with a long metal antenna. At that time, our area required us to call the sheriff's office directly. In her panic, she could not remember the number. Instead, she pressed redial. The phone connected to one of her friends. Between broken breaths, my sister explained that someone was trying to enter the house and begged her friend to come with an adult immediately. I curled up on the floor beside the bed. My hands would not stop shaking. We listened for footsteps, breaking glass, or the front door opening. The house remained silent. I pictured someone already inside, standing in the hallway and listening to us breathe behind the barricade. Neither of us approached the bedroom window. We were afraid that whoever had moved from the front porch to the backyard might now be circling the house. Eventually, headlights swept across the bedroom wall. My sister's friend had arrived with her parents. They pulled into the driveway, sounded the horn, and turned on the porch lights. Only then did we leave the bedroom. No one was outside. The front storm door was closed. The wooden door was still locked. The back door remained secured by its handle lock, although it had not been deadbolted. The adults searched the yard and the side of the house, but found no one. There were no clear footprints. Nothing had been stolen or moved. Near the bottom of the back door, however, we noticed several dark scuff marks. None of us could remember whether they had been there before. Our parents contacted the authorities, but there was little for them to investigate. Whoever had been outside had left before the car arrived. We never learned who it was. It may have been someone trying to frighten two children. It may have been a drunk stranger or someone looking for an unlocked house. But the part that still bothers me is the movement between the doors. The person first stood on the front porch and struck the main door while the storm door was open. Then, after waiting in silence, they walked around the house and tried the back entrance. They did not call out. They did not identify themselves. They simply tested both ways inside. Nothing like that ever happened to my sister or me again. Even now, I cannot sit in a brightly lit room with uncovered windows at night without thinking about that glass wall. Before going to bed, I always check every lock twice. Not because I am afraid someone will knock, because I remember how quietly the handle turned before the banging began.